Welcome to Thought to Action, presented by the London Centre for Policy Research. On this programme, we discuss ideas, solutions to issues, and bringing our thoughts to action. Follow us on London Centre's Twitter page, the LCPR, the London Centre's Facebook page, and various other social media. For more on the London Centre for Policy Research, who we are and what we do, visit our website, londoncentre.org. If you'd like to help us create more content like this, and enjoy future exclusive versions of Ask Us Anything and other special content, we welcome you to become part of our Patreon community at patreon.com/thoughttoaction. Also, feel free to share this video and comment on our discussion and ask questions. We appreciate your helping us spread the word about our programs and conversations. Today on Thought to Action, I have the founder of the Crime Prevention Research Centre, Dr. John Lott, a man about whom Milton Friedman once said that he has few equals as a perspective analyst of controversial public policy issues. I am a huge admirer. I've read much of his work. I can't say all of it, but much of it. And I will say that before we get started with John, that I admire his work most for the fact that he makes his data open to everybody and allows people to critique and criticize it, which is the right way to do things. Transparency is hugely important, especially when you're dealing with something as important as guns and crime. John, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me on.
So you have just come back from time spent in the administration and returned to the Crime Prevention Research Centre. Did that give you any new perspectives on how the system works?
Well, it's my second tour of duty in Washington. I think it pretty much confirmed most of my worst fears about the government. The last time I was there was in the 1980s. I was chief economist for the United States Sentencing Commission. What's changed is, some things have remained the same. The civil servants who work in government are overwhelmingly Democrats. But the thing that's changed now is that they're much more kind of in your face about being Democrats. When I was there before, I don't remember anybody kind of explicitly telling me that they were Democrats, but you run into people. It was kind of amazing, just out of the blue. They would just feel it was necessary to insist on telling me that they were Democrats. The weird thing is, you're talking about policy. If you have an argument to make, go and make the argument. I don't really care what your political views are. Generally, I care about what the arguments are that you're making there.
That's actually fascinating, because amongst other things, civil servants are supposed to be apolitical in their job. The very fact that it's changed that much is really telling, and not in a good way. They're supposed to serve both sets of masters, if you like, in an equal and even-handed way, and they're obviously not doing that.
Yeah, well, I think that's pretty clear. Even before I got there, I suppose I had concerns about obviously the spying on the Trump campaign by the FBI. It makes you think that the only way you can have something like that occur is if basically everybody in the room agrees with each other politically, because otherwise you'd have leaks, you'd have people going and whistleblowing on them or other things. And the fact that that didn't happen for the very long period of time that they were doing that kind of shows you that the people at the top, Comey and McCabe and Strzok and other people, saw eye to eye on doing these things.
That is truly fascinating. As I say, the fact that partisan politics comes in also means that you get complete tunnel vision and the ability to, if you like, think outside the box, consider other options, take ideas from anywhere. Good ideas can appear from anywhere. That's one of the basics of innovation and real free thought. And you're basically saying that free thought is no longer approved of within the civil service bureaucracy of America.
Yeah, I think it's pretty bad. I can give you a number of examples, but one example, when I got there, I had an interest in trying to look at the NICS background check system. you frequently hear from gun control advocates that there's 3.5 million dangerous prohibited people that have been stopped from buying guns because of background checks. Problem is that's wrong. What they should say is that there have been 3.5 million initial denials, and something over 99% of those, we don't know the exact number, are false positives. You know, it's one thing to stop a felon from buying a gun. It's another thing to stop somebody simply because they have a name similar to a felon from buying a gun. And I believe it overwhelmingly discriminates against Black males and Hispanic males because people tend to have names similar to others in their racial groups. When you're looking at things like roughly phonetically similar names and similar birthdays, you know, Hispanics have names similar to Hispanics. Blacks tend to have names similar to other Blacks. You know, 33% of Black males in the United States are legally prohibited from owning a gun just because of felony background records. Well, whose names are their names most likely to be confused with? Other law-abiding, good Black males who want to have a gun to protect themselves and their families. And if my research convinces me of anything, it's the people who are most likely victims of violent crime, poor Blacks who live in high crime urban areas, who are the ones who benefit the most from owning guns for protection. But
that is a great point, John. It also actually raises the other interesting one to me, because in the same way that proving a negative is almost impossible, that surely the main idea of the NICS background check system is to deter criminals from even trying to get a legal gun. And that you can't prove the number of people, number of criminals that didn't try and buy one legally because they knew they would be stopped by the NICS check.
well, you can go and look to see what happens to things like crime rates, other proxies for it. And, you know, there's been a lot of research. I haven't really seen anything that shows that the background check system has stopped crime. Usually gun control advocates say, well, it's just because it didn't go far enough. We have to have a more extensive background check system if we're going to be successful there. I'm very dubious, and we can get into that. But
Yeah.
just on the point we were making about the fact that what I was asking for. So when I got there, I talked to the people at the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and they agreed to go and ask the FBI for some additional information on the racial and gender breakdowns of those who were denied being able to go and purchase a gun.
Yeah.
Problem is, we asked for it, about a month went by, and then, well, first of all, they tried to convince everybody that we shouldn't be interested in the data, that it wasn't useful data to get. You know, the bizarre thing is the FBI and everybody else in Washington breaks down everything just about by race and gender, you know, but they didn't think that this was a useful or interesting question. Anyway, about a month goes by, and then 2 days after the general election, they got a response from the FBI, which was basically two parts. One was they were going to require that the Bureau of Justice Statistics fill out a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request, which was pretty startling. I mean, this is something usually reserved for media people, you know, news people that ask for questions. It's not something that one part of the Department of Justice is supposed to have to ask another part of the Department of Justice for. And then they also said, and in any case, there's really no way we're going to be able to get to this before January 20th, which was kind of an explicit acknowledgement as now the election's over. And they apparently, I guess, didn't believe that the Biden administration would be interested in getting that type of data. And so they were telling us to, you know, go away. And unfortunately, that's not the only bad experience I had with the FBI. I'm pretty convinced that the type of political corruption that we were talking about before at the top of the agency has seeped down through at least the data gathering part of the FBI, which is pretty serious. I mean, they put out a lot of data. I tried to point out a number of errors that they had made in the data, and they just, in fact, I pointed them out, and they were not interested in dealing with them in any way. I had gotten, just kind of inside baseball, I'd gotten the chief of staff for the White House to call up Bill Barr to go and suggest a couple projects. Somebody that I knew had kind of interceded for me. And the morning that Bill Barr was called to go and try to get the FBI to help me out on some things, or at least be reasonable on these things, later that afternoon, Politico ran a story about me being at the Department of Justice. And then kind of all heck kind of broke loose with the gun control people kind of bombarding the White House and the Department of Justice with complaints about me being there. But what I think happened was, and I can't prove this, is that Bill Barr probably contacted somebody in the FBI, said, look into this. And rather than kind of coming to me and working with me on it, they're apparently, my guess is, they went to the media. And then the media person kind of, alerted everybody that I was there in order to try to create kind of, a ruckus to make it difficult for me to do anything.
As I mentioned in the opening, one of the things I admire so much about your work is the fact that you make your data sources open and your methodology open. And that obviously opens you up potentially to a lot of criticism, but because you do it so well and you know your stuff so well, basically your arguments to me are pretty irrefutable. And what worries me about what you've just said is that it's very obvious that they want to have their own facts, if I can put it that way.
Right. I mean, I'll give you one example. One of the things that I was looking at was the FBI active shooting reports. The initial report that they did, that came out shortly before the general election in 2014, about a month beforehand, was claiming that there had been a big increase in active shootings from 2000 to 2013, growing at something like almost 17% a year. The problem was how they collected the data. First of all, just so people know, active shooting cases are anything from somebody firing a gun in public and nobody wounded or killed, all the way up to a mass public shooting. And it turns out that they had used Google News searches to go and do the search. Now, the problem with that is, anybody who knows that very well knows that stories fall out over time in the Google News search. A story something may have happened last week and it'll be in the search, but after 5 years go by, you may not find it anymore. And if you're talking about mass shootings where, let's say, 10 people or 8 people have been killed, you're always going to find hundreds of news stories, even decades later. But if you're talking about an active shooting case where, let's say, a gun's fired in public and nobody is shot, nobody's wounded even, you may be lucky to find one news story on it. And so, what you find is that most of their stories were in just the last few years of the time period that they looked at. Mm-hmm. And it was overwhelmingly these types of cases. Yep. And so it was purely an artifact of how they had collected the data.
For the supporters of the Second Amendment, I will say this is one of the topics that John covers very well in his latest book, Gun Control Myths. And it's all the facts are actually there, and the explanations for the claims are there. And it's one of the things that John really is fantastic at, is digging into claims that don't make much sense and showing why they are probably at best, shall we just say, misinformed. I'm also concerned as well that from the Second Amendment point of view, this type of selective fact picking that you're talking about will roll on more and more into the future with what you were saying just now about the changes in the bureaucracy in DC. Can I just switch the topic a little bit, if I may, John? And I would encourage everybody, by the way, to go to the Crime Prevention Research Center, which is at crimeresearch.org. And you can get a ton of information about the truth about the Second Amendment and the various attempts there are to manipulate the controls on it. And I look at the thing as I am a huge believer in the Second Amendment as written and meant by the founding fathers. But I understand that there is crime around and criminals around and guns are used. And I'm constantly looking for ways to decrease crime. And I know, John, you do that. Your thinking is along the same lines. I worry very much indeed that most of the gun control efforts will have no effect, or as you mentioned earlier with minorities, adverse effects on crime rates in this country.
No, I mean, I agree. You know, I think if you look around the world, the countries with the highest murder, homicide rates tend to have the strictest gun control. But I think the simplest thing to look at is just what happens before and after gun bans have gone into effect. If guns on net are bad, then you would think every time you have a gun ban in, you know, any type of area, whether it's a city or a country or an island nation, you'd think you would see drops, large significant drops, but at least some drops in murder and homicide rates. In fact, that's never the case. I can't find a single place where we can look at crime rates both before and after a ban where you see murder rates falling. In fact, they don't even stay the same. Every single time they go up, and they often go up by large amounts.
Absolutely right. I understand exactly what you're saying. Isn't it interesting as well that Joe Biden, for example, touts being heavily involved in the assault weapons ban of 94 to 2004. And your data shows not wild exaggeration of that, but it actually shows an increase in the use of rifles in mass shootings during that period, and then a decrease afterwards as the ban was lifted. And what is it about, dare I say, the politicians of this country, that we have all these various laboratories around the country where different cities and different states and different communities have different levels of gun control. And you can easily see by looking at those records what works and what doesn't work. And yet they persist over and over in following a political line of trying to impose policies and laws that don't work.
There are a couple things to point out here. One is, you know, if you see something bad happens, the natural reaction is if I just get rid of the thing, the bad thing won't happen anymore. You know, so economists see this with something like price controls. People see the price of oil going up and you think, well, if I just put a law there that says the price can't go up, the problem will be solved. Of course, then you have shortages and other types of things that may take a while to occur and people don't see the connection as well. I think there's something similar in the case of guns. I mean, you have a shooting that occurs and a gun. And so people think if I can only get rid of the guns, those shootings won't occur. You know, in fact, as we just mentioned with gun bans, every place that's banned guns has seen an increase in murders. And there's a simple reason for that. And that is who's most likely to obey the law. If the, you know, it's great that maybe you can take some guns away from criminals, but if you primarily take guns away from law-abiding good citizens, you can actually make it easier for criminals to go and commit crimes. I mean, you see this very clearly with something like these gun-free zones. I understand the motivation. They think, well, if I only ban guns from a particular area, then people will be safer. The problem is, it's the law-abiding good citizens who obey the ban, not the criminals. In fact, it actually encourages the criminals to go, or terrorists to go and do the attack there because they want to go to places where it's going to be relatively more likely that they'll be successful in committing their attack. Because if you have a situation where victims can't defend themselves, then they have less to worry about. If you have one police officer there and they're in uniform, they have almost impossible jobs stopping these attacks, because if an attacker does go after that area, who's the first person they're going to shoot? They're going to shoot the officer who's in uniform. He's kind of like somebody with a neon sign above him that says, shoot me first, because these attackers know that once they kill that person, then they're going to have free reign to go after other people. If you allowed people to have permanent concealed handguns, for example, you take away the strategic advantages that the killers have. In fact, if you're going to have an officer there, you make his life safer, because when the attackers reveal themselves, when they go after the police officer, then they have to worry that somebody unknown to them, to the side or behind them or someplace else, might be able to stop them. And that deters them. These killers, their goal in these mass public shootings is to try to go and kill as many people as possible. And if you can take that away from them, if you can convince them that they're going to have a hard time being as successful as they want to be, you can discourage them from going and doing these attacks. It's the reason why since 1950, about 94% of the mass public shootings have taken place in areas where people have been banned, citizens have been banned from having guns. These attackers may be crazy in some sense, but they're not stupid.
Absolutely.
I mean, you read the diaries, you read the statements that these people leave, and many times they go into extreme detail. These guys plan these attacks long in advance. 6 months is a relatively short time for these mass public shootings to be planned. You have some people like the Sandy Hook killer, he was planning his attack for something like 2.5 years prior to the attack.
I understand exactly what you're saying, and I'll take it a step further, because one of my favorite facts that I learned through you, but then did some research of my own, is the difference between in burglaries and home invasions. And in Britain, since the effective almost total ban on guns took place there, 70% of burglars caught and questioned in jail admitted that they preferred to do a home invasion when the owner was home, because that way they guaranteed that they would get the money that was in the wallets or pocketbooks, as well as whatever else they found. Over here, it's less than 20%, because the burglars are frightened that if there's somebody home, they'll be shot.
It's a lot less than 20% numbers that I've seen. And, and when you go and also ask the burglars in the UK and the United States how long they spend casing a home before they break in, American burglars spend about twice as long casing a home to make sure that nobody's there. The British counterparts really don't care, or in fact, as you say, even prefer that they're there. And what you find is that the reason why American burglars spend so long is they tell you they're afraid of getting shot. And if they can make sure that nobody's home, they can help and assure that when they break in, they're less likely to get shot.
John, this has been a tremendous thing. My guest today, John Lott, an absolute guru as far as I'm concerned on facts around the whole gun control, gun rights issues. Founder of the Crime Prevention Research Center, economist, academic, and a genuine source of real solid information where you can check the data that he uses and the facts that he comes up with. His stuff is all available on crimeresearch.org. And I would just like to thank everybody for watching this edition of Thought to Action. John, I hope we can get you back again, because I'd love to talk through things like red flag laws and other social aspects and what sort of things might actually work to help reduce gun crime. And my favorite one there is the topic of just how many criminal guns are there in the country, for which I have done some research of my own and have a little feel that I'd be interested in your views on. Anyway, for our followers, londoncenter.org, and we are on patreon.com/thought2action. This is the London Centre's Thought to Action series. Thank you very much for watching. Please tell your friends. Thank you for listening. And you can find us on just about every type of social media that's going.